Alright, so what's going on, guys? I want to start a new series where I talk about the differences between the Berserk 1997 anime and the manga. Now we're going to go episode by episode and just talk about the key differences, some of the moments that they skipped in the manga, but without further ado, let's get started. Now the anime starts with Godo fixing Guts' Dragon Slayer. Now, of course, this scene takes place during the Black Swordsman arc, which is the first arc of the series. However, as the readers, we don't officially meet Godo until chapter 48 in the manga, and this is actually just a flashback when Guts is talking to Casca. Now after Guts gets his sword fixed, he goes to the town of Koka searching for the Snake Baron Apostle. Now the anime skips the iconic opening scene in which Guts screws and kills the female Apostle. And of course, if you haven't seen Conan the Barbarian, the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger, you would sort of know that this Berserk scene is sort of a play on that moment in which Conan has sex with the witch-like creature and then tosses her ass in the fire, whereas Guts blows up the Apostle with his cannon, which starts a fire as well. We then get to the part where a group of Koka thugs is now terrorizing a teenage girl inside of a bar, and the teenage girl is Colette. Now Colette doesn't show up until episode 0B, i.e. the brand in the manga, where she gets possessed by the demons and beheads her own father. Now her father does show up in this episode and he gets beaten up by the Koka thugs, but in the manga, they aren't in the bar whatsoever. This is Puck getting beaten up, and in fact, he's got a noose around his neck. And Puck doesn't even show up in this episode. So that's a huge difference from the manga because Puck's nowhere to be seen. Now I can understand why they didn't want to show Puck, and I actually appreciate the anime more because of it, because the 1997 anime is primarily telling the Golden Age story, and the Golden Age story doesn't have a lot of the mythological creatures and apostles in it. We see Zod, we see Wyald, we see Puck towards the eclipse, but it's mostly a story about, realistic fights about warring states in a European-esque landscape. So I think it wanted to tell more of that story and make it realistic, and I feel like the ending episode, episode 25 with the eclipse, comes as more of a shock because of it. And I actually watched the 1997 anime before watching the manga, and I think I appreciated it more because of that fact. Now, of course, Mira's vision is just absolute perfection. I'm not taking anything away from that, but to tell a story verbatim is not really taking any chances. And I feel like sometimes taking chances, showing things from a different perspective, showing things in a different light is kind of interesting sometimes. They also don't show the Skull Knight in the anime whatsoever as well. So, it wasn't supposed to be an anime that told the entire Berserk canon. It was just supposed to be primarily about the Golden Age arc and just showing a unique perspective about it. And I fell in love with the anime, and I still love it till this day. So some of you may disagree, some of you may say, well, taking out the mythological elements sort of castrates Mira's vision, and it's not really Berserk at the end of the day. I mean, it's all based on taste and personal preference, but I appreciate it for what it is, and I think at the end of the day, it still does the Berserk manga justice. Even so, with the 25 episodes, they still had to truncate a lot of the events, and I feel like if you're going to get into those mythological elements, then you sort of have to tell the Black Swordsman story in its entirety, and they just didn't have time for it all. I mean, it would have been like 75 episodes if you did the entire Black Swordsman arc and the entire Golden Age arc. So I appreciate it for what it is, and I still love it to this day.
Just don't read the manga.
Now in the manga, after Guts takes care of the thugs, he's immediately taken into custody by the town guards. He is henceforth tortured, sees a vision of the demon child, and is eventually saved by Puck. Guts also mentions the brand on his neck. Now in the anime, Guts heads to the forest where he's possessed by evil spirits and sees a vision about the God Hand. We see the brand bleed, but we have no information about what it is or why he has it. Now I can understand why they got rid of the scene with the demon child. The thing is they ended the anime at a specific point in the eclipse, and I know a lot of people are like, well, that's the worst cliffhanger of all time, because then it's like, well, you're forced to read the manga at that point. But isn't that a good thing at the end of the day? I mean, the manga is perfection. I mean, shouldn't it be sort of a impetus to get you into the manga? Like, if they told the entire story as it was, a lot of people wouldn't have got into the manga. They might have just been like, well, I know the story already. What's the point of reading the manga? And then you would have missed all those critical details that Mira put in there, all the symbolism, all the beautiful artwork. So I love the way that it told the story, and that was one of the prime reasons that I wanted to read the manga in the first place was, shit, what's gonna happen to Guts after this? Now, the anime does a great job of capturing the terror of the Snake Baron, yet it pales in comparison to the manga, since we see him drinking the blood from the dead body of a child. But it's easy to see why this scene didn't make it to air. It's also easy to see why this scene didn't make it to air as well. Now, in both the manga and the anime, Guts blasts the Snake Baron with his cannon, slices him in half, and abuses him with his repeating crossbow. However, in the manga, he questions the apostle about the 5 members of the God Hand, which is pivotal because this serves as the impetus for the following adventure with the Count, which, as we all know, doesn't occur in the 1997 anime, since it completely skips the rest of the Black Swordsman arc and jumps into the Golden Age arc. And it doesn't even go to the beginning of the Golden Age arc, but what is known as Chapter 4 of the Golden Age arc. So as a reference, Episode 1 begins with the Black Swordsman, which is Chapter 1 in Volume 1. It skips the 2 other chapters in Volume 1, and completely skips Volumes 2 and 3. It thusly picks up in the second chapter of Volume 4, so quite a bit of the story is left untold. Of course, with this being a 25-episode series, we can't expect all the details to be filled in, especially if you want to do the Golden Age arc justice, which, that was the primary aim of the show anyway, and they were going for more of a realistic angle. The final difference that you'll notice with Episode 1 is that Guts picks up the Beyblade of the Snake Baron. This doesn't happen in the manga. The Beyblade that he holds to this day actually came from the Count, and he received this from Vargas. But with that, that's the end of Episode 1. Let's get started with Episode 2. So Episode 2 starts off with Bazuzo terrorizing anyone who crosses his path. Guts steps forward and the fight plays out like it did in the manga, yet Mira provides us with more detail that the TV censors didn't allow, for obvious reasons. Corcus and a couple of others attack Guts and everything proceeds as it does in the manga. Casca shoots Guts with a crossbow and he eventually finds out she's a girl. Griffith engages Guts and easily takes him down, so really nothing new here. Now, the first difference of note happens during Guts' nightmare. Firstly, from an anime perspective, we don't know who Gambino is at this point in the story. And this is because we skipped a couple chapters in the Golden Age arc, which we will revisit in future episodes of the anime. However, at this point, this Gambino character is a bit of a mystery. Also, we never get confirmation that the devilish spirit is Donovan. We see this kind of hulking creature, but it doesn't even really look like it's human. It almost just sort of seems like this monstrous being, and it's all red and bloody. The anime likely kept this vague to keep the viewer guessing as to what happened in Guts' past. Finally, Guts holds up Gambino's leg that he lost in battle, which is kind of ironic in the anime because he stands up. So they likely kept this ambiguous to kind of keep you guessing so that you wouldn't really know what happened. And in the manga as well, the dog that Gambino is playing with has the face of Shizu on there as well. Now, Guts wakes up with Casca on top of him and calls her quote-unquote black eyes, whereas in the manga, he calls her quote-unquote dark eyes. Griffith tells Guts about the Band of the Hawk. In response to Guts' question about not killing him, Griffith states, "Because I want you to join me, Guts." Now in the manga, he says, "Because I've realized I want you, Guts." Now, this kind of seems like a trivial difference, but the manga version makes Griffith's words seem more possessive. To substantiate this, Guts even remarks, "Are you a homo?" So Mira makes it clear from the outset that Griffith desires Guts for more than just military reasons, whereas the anime keeps things ambiguous by using the word join, as if they're partnering up. And then things pretty much end up in line with the manga from here on out, so this episode didn't see any major differences like the previous episode. It mostly stuck to the source material. Now, episode 3, there weren't that many differences, so I decided to combine it with episode 4 so it would be a longer video and give you a little more meat. So here we go. Guts and Griffith proceed with their battle. The fight more or less plays out like it did in the manga, with Griffith jumping on top of Guts' blade, Guts biting the tip of Griffith's sword, and Griffith winning by dislocating Guts' shoulder. Griffith says, "Now you belong to me." Now, the first difference occurs when two noblemen discuss the Band of the Hawk. They dub them Death on the Battlefield, and worry that they may lose their prestige or honor if the Hawk rises up in the ranks. This scene is an anime original and doesn't occur in the manga. Now, these two noblemen do talk in the manga, however, it happens after the battle, not before, and the conversation varies a little bit in its wordage, so a little bit different there. Next up, Casca protects Guts like she did in the manga. Guts thanks her, but she storms off. In the next mission, Guts accepts the rear guard just like the manga. Now, Casca's internal thoughts differ slightly in the manga. She refers to Guts as a louse, showing a greater level of disdain, because in the anime she doesn't use this word, so Casca is a lot more contentious in the manga, and I think Miro was sort of trying to set it up like she absolutely hates Guts, wants nothing to do with him, so the whole reveal of when they make love to each other comes as more of a shock, whereas here, Casca doesn't like Guts, but it doesn't seem like there's as much vitriol behind it. Now, the Band of the Hawk travels through the river and makes their attack like the manga. Now, in the anime, when the Band of the Hawk returns to the castle, Judo reports to Griffith about Guts' talent, and then Rickard comes back and tells him that Guts hasn't come back yet, making Griffith worry. In the manga, Griffith talks to Corcus, who admires Guts' talents, and states he doesn't know where he is. Now afterwards, everything plays out like it did in the manga. Guts is saved by Griffith, Pippin, and Judo. Griffith lures the enemy into the cannons, and they win the battle. And things just pretty much play out like they did in the manga from here on out. Alright, so now we're on to episode 4. Guts and Judo speak about Griffith. The conversation more or less goes the same, but Mira makes it more obvious that Griffith may be evil, which makes sense since we already know about the Black Swordsman arc. The anime, however, doesn't make this so obvious, and for good reason. Griffith and Guts have their water fight, and in the manga, Judo says, "Lots of energy this early," whereas in the anime, he says,
"It's still early, but things are looking up."
So apparently, anime Judo's got some jokes.
If I were you, I'd tap that ass. Oh, I'm sorry. My ghetto came out.
Griffith tells Guts about the Beylit in his own kingdom, just like the manga. Guts henceforth wonders what he's been doing these past 4 years as the Band of the Hawk enters another battle. Now, after this chapter in the manga, we have a 3-year time skip. But in the anime, we go back to the early chapters of the Golden Age arc to find out about Guts' past. Now, we don't see the scene in which Guts was born from a corpse, but some mercenaries mention it along with Shizu. And as we find out, much of Guts' childhood is truncated or eliminated here. For example, the moment where Gambino gives Guts medicine for his wounds is removed, which is rather pivotal because despite his coarse demeanor and abominable actions, Mira makes it a point to provide examples where Gambino actually looks like he cares for Guts, whereas the anime, it just looks like he's this total asshole. In addition, the rape incident with Donovan is completely removed and it's not even referenced, unless you count the nightmare Guts had in episode 2, which, like I said, was rather ambiguous and up for interpretation. And it makes sense because referencing rape on television is kind of a touchy issue, so I can understand why they got rid of this event. We then jump forward to Gambino attacking Guts, and we get a brief glimpse of the trees and the corpse. Guts finally halts Gambino's erratic behavior, and he sticks the sword through Gambino's heart, whereas in the manga, he sticks the sword through his neck. Again, the animators probably saw this as too gruesome and henceforth changed it. Things proceed like the manga with the mercenary band chasing him down, and Guts defending himself against the wolves. Now in the manga, we go straight to the fight with Bazuzo, but in the anime, the flashback ends and we see Griffith offering his hand to Guts. Now this moment takes place in the chapter titled Guardian Angels of Desire number 6, which occurs during the Black Swordsman arc. Now in the manga, this served as a flashback prior to the Count's decision to sacrifice his own daughter. In the anime, they actually integrated this into the story at its appropriate moment. So it's kind of cool to see where this actually happened in the story as opposed to being just a random flashback and we're kind of left to guess like, when did this exactly happen? So it's kind of cool to see that they actually fit together the pieces of the puzzle, so it kind of gave us a better perspective. We then have the 3-year time skip. The Black Ram Cavalry smash through the soldiers of Midland until Guts puts a halt to their rampage. And that pretty much ends episode 4 of the 1997 Berserk. This episode saw a lot of omitted details and rearranging of certain events. But like I said, removing Donovan was understandable given the heinousness of his actions. But at the same time, without it, one doesn't truly understand why Guts was so averse to people touching him. So things are a bit unexplained in the anime, but I don't think it's egregious enough where it's like, well, it's a plot hole. Nah, not really. Things still blend together seamlessly. It's just a few details left here and there are left untold. But yeah, that's all I got for episodes 3 and 4, guys. So we begin where we left off. The Band of the Hawk takes on and takes down the Black Ram Cavalry. Griffith gives Guts a thumbs up for a job well done. Now in the anime, the camera focuses in on Casca, who seems slightly irked by the adulation that Guts is receiving from Griffith. Whereas in the manga, this moment doesn't exist. The Hawks Raiders congratulate Guts after the battle, and Casca asks Guts to speak with him alone, all like in the manga. Casca henceforth excoriates the quote-unquote mad dog, and Guts grabs her wrist in a fit of rage before Griffith intervenes, just like the manga. You know, as an aside, it would have been interesting to see how this would have played out if Griffith didn't come between them. Come between them, huh? Interesting choice of words there on my part. But on a more serious note, I almost wonder what Guts would have done here, and if it would have got serious, like if Guts would have actually hit her or something, because he grabbed her wrist in a very vicious fashion here, so I almost felt a little bit of fear watching this again, and I'm like, man, is he gonna hit her? Like, I know he's not, but he kind of gives off that vibe that maybe he might. So interesting little scene there. Now Griffith reminisces about their duel from 3 years ago and explains that Guts' volatile actions are a part of his plans. Griffith henceforth gets knighted, while Guts strength trains with his sword. Nothing new here. Now the second half of the episode is an anime original. In the manga, we go straight from the knighting ceremony to the confrontation with Zod. In the anime, Griffith has his men attack an enemy supply base by focusing their efforts on the front of the base. After laying out the plans, Corkus makes a remark that Guts will get all the credit again, and Casca reminds him that Griffith's orders are absolute. Casca then makes a half-hearted attempt to mend fences with Guts, but he ignores her and walks off. Now, I feel like this interaction with Guts and Casca and the remarks by Corkus are rather interesting because it sort of builds on the idea that not everyone in the Band of the Hawk is happy with Guts' actions. Most are, you know, probably 90-95% of the Hawk is fairly happy with Guts. They're glad to have him on their side. He's such a force, such an asset, and they're just loving it because less and less of them are dying in battle and all their plans are going off without a hitch. But it is interesting to see this whole dynamic with Casca and Corkus sort of expanded upon because we have it in the manga, but it's nice to see further details, to see that it really is weighing on their psyches constantly and it's sort of gnawing at them in sort of insidious ways. Now, Adon happens to be in charge of watching the base, since the Black Ram Cavalry were heavily crippled in the last battle. Now, it's rather interesting because the anime makes it a point to prominently feature Adon in many battles. He more or less serves as the primary antagonist for the first half of the show, whereas in the manga, he sort of feels like an afterthought. In addition, Adon doesn't even show up until chapter 14 in the manga. So Mira really wasn't putting Adon in there to be this primary focus point, to be this perpetual antagonist to the Band of the Hawk, whereas he gets thrown in a lot earlier in the anime and he shows up time and time again. Now Griffith's men break through the fort gate, and after realizing the gravity of the situation, Adon himself runs away in fear. However, he sets fire to the armory in an attempt to kill Griffith's men in the midst of the invasion. Guts notices the flames and heads towards Griffith to warn him. Casca, angered by the fact that he's breaking rank again, excoriates the swordsman, but Guts swings his sword at her and barks at her to go back. Guts then warns Griffith and they make their escape, and upon escaping, the Band of the Hawk acknowledges Guts for his keen awareness. Yet Casca can't help but feel irritated by his disobedience once again. This moment further contextualizes her disdain for Guts and how she's viewed him in the past 3 years. Though she does apologize and acknowledge his efforts in protecting Griffith, it more or less seems forced, much like a child apologizing to their sibling in the presence of their parents. I mean, yeah, they're apologizing, they're saying the words, but at the end of the day, do they really mean it? And that's kind of the same situation with Casca. Is she really apologizing to Guts? Does she mean it? Probably not. Adon then boasts to Baskan that he killed the Band of the Hawk, but the leader of the Purple Rhino Knights sees through his lies. Now Baskan, just like Adon, shows up a great deal earlier in the anime compared to the manga. For example, we don't see him until chapter 22 in the manga, which happens after the battle with Guts and the 100 soldiers. So the anime makes it a point to provide more details about the Tudor army, so as to build them up as one of the main threats in the series, which they are in the anime. Whereas in the manga, they were a major threat, but it always kind of felt like they were this pseudo-threat in a way. Like it always felt like there was a bigger presence waiting for Guts in the future. Whereas in the anime, it sort of tricks you a little bit. It sort of makes the Tudor army the big bad antagonist, And then when things kind of take a turn for the worse, you're kind of left to guess, like, what the hell just happened? Where did all these real threats go? And why are all these mythological creatures coming into the fold? I mean, we sort of already know that from the first episode with the Snake Baron, but I feel like you kind of get stuck in this malaise where it's like, things just seem normal for the rest of the series, and then you're left to wonder, like, did that first episode really happen? What's going on here? And you sort of forget about it a little bit, so I think it comes as more of a shock in the end, and I absolutely love that about the anime, actually. I feel like it gives you a new perspective on it. Now, of course, whenever the staff implements anime original content, the question then becomes, why couldn't they have adapted more from the source material instead? Like I stated in the first episode, the idea was to bring things down to earth, tell a realish story about medieval Europe, and keep things focused on character interactions and growth. And honestly, it worked beautifully. For my personal preference, whenever a manga gets adapted to anime format, it's best to view it as a separate entity. The director is adapting their own unique vision onto the screen, and it's a good thing when they interject their own ideas to give the work its own unique character. I know we would all love to see Berserk verbatim in anime format, but isn't that what the manga's for? I mean, we already have that. I can read the manga anytime I want. I already have Mira's vision. I want to see someone else's vision of Berserk. I want to see some twists and turns. I want to see different perspectives. I want to see anime original content. As an aside, I know a lot of people have been talking about the idea of Mira's assistants continuing the Berserk tale in manga format. And I mostly cringe at this idea because I view the manga as Mira's work. That's his vision, his artwork, and his ideas. But if, hypothetically speaking, an anime studio adapted the Fantasia arc and offered an original ending to tie up all the loose ends, I'd actually be completely fine with that, since it's a separate piece of fiction at that point. So if it was a movie or an anime series of Mira's work and it completed the tale, I'm fine, because that's really not Mira's work at that point. It's drawing upon his ideas, but it's a new director, new staff, everything is different. They're taking the skeletal framework and they're making it their own. Whereas the manga, that is Mira's. Like, I don't want anyone else to put their fingerprints on it. So I'm sure some of you will disagree, some of you will probably agree, but yeah, those are my thoughts on that. I've sidetracked it long enough. Now, not only does Baskan show up earlier than expected, so does Genin, who didn't show up until chapter 17 in the manga, and he really actually didn't show up because this was a flashback of when Casca was recounting Griffith's encounters with him years ago. Now, afterwards, the King of Midland announces that Griffith will head up the next castle siege, and we have our first sighting of Julius, who expresses visible disdain for Griffith, which Foss picks up on right away. Now, in the manga, Julius doesn't appear until chapter 7, which happens after the castle siege and the confrontation with Zod. And it's kind of interesting because now we know how Foss got the idea of manipulating Julius. Whereas in the manga, it just kind of caught you off guard. You didn't really know who this Foss character was. So I love that it's tying up all the loose ends and sort of providing a bridge to certain events while providing original content. So episode 5 was absolutely fantastic, guys. I love all the original content about it. And like I said, it's its own separate entity. You got Berserk with Kentaro Miura, the manga. You got the 1997 version, which is absolutely epic, 10 out of 10. You got the movies, which do an okay-ish job. The animation in that first and second movie weren't the greatest, but still very good in their own respect. And then you got 2016 and 2017 Berserk, which, you know, I know how we all feel about that one. But yeah, I would actually be fine, guys, if they made an anime adaptation of Berserk, the Fantasia arc, and they decide to kind of go in their own direction and sort of make some educated guesses as to where Miro was going with the series. But let me know what you guys think of that idea. Let me know what you think of episode 5, and I'll see you guys next time with episode 6. Now, Griffith's men, led by Guts, attempt to take the castle, like the manga. Things go well until a single soldier halts their progress, Nosferatu Zod. Rickert explains that he's purportedly been fighting for over 100 years and is immortal. So nothing new here. Gaston attempts to halt Guts from engaging with Zod, but the swordsman pushes him away by force. Now when Delos comes from the castle in the anime, he's covered in blood. Now in the manga, he's missing almost the entire right side of his body. I think there's even brain matter showing as well. The scene where Guts enters the castle is also more graphic than the anime, which makes sense because the anime staff was limited in what they could show on TV. But with that said, I still feel like they captured the terror of the situation and how no one was spared from Zod's ruthlessness. Now Guts parries Zod's attack, just like the manga. Now one difference from the manga is that Zod is wearing pants. Whereas in the manga, he's just completely naked, so I guess they couldn't show a demon penis on TV. Now when I rewatched this fight, I was immediately reminded of Guts' future battle with Serpico. I wonder if this was done intentionally on Miura's part to show how he's become more monstrous over time in terms of his strength and demeanor. It also somewhat supports my theory of Guts and Zod being related in some fashion, possibly through the King Geyserk lineage. Watch this video for further explanation. In the anime, Griffith announces he's going in for Guts. In the manga, we just see Griffith arrive after Zod transforms. Now Guts gambles on one strike, cutting off Zod's blade and stabbing his body, just like the manga. Zod then transforms, which instills absolute dread in Guts' soul. After battering Guts, Griffith's men arrive to shoot arrows into the beast. Now before we move forward, I just wanted to pause the video for a moment to make an observation. Zod's height here looks to be roughly twice that of Guts. Yet when Zod later impales Wyald with his horns, he's fucking towering over him. And it looks like he's 10 times taller than Guts. Then when he arrived at Virtanis Harbor, he looked like King Kong climbing a skyscraper. I bring this up because as far as we know, when an apostle transforms, they only have one monstrous form. Whereas Zod, it seems like he can manipulate his height at will depending on the nature of the battle. Like for example, when he transforms on the Hill of Swords, he doesn't look nearly as tall as when he fought Wyald. Of course, Zod is not like the other apostles, and there's a great deal of mystery surrounding his role/purpose, especially considering that he was outside of the festival fighting Skull Knight rather than indulging in the massacre. Which makes me think he's not like the other apostles, and he didn't use a Bailet to achieve his apostle form. I sort of think he had a split in his personality, and he allowed his inner beast of darkness to take hold of him, just like Guts might let his inner beast of darkness take hold of him. But that's a story for another day. Watch this video if you haven't already. Now in the anime, Casca, Pippin, Corcus, Judo, and Rickert are waiting outside the castle under Griffith's orders. In the manga, they accompany Griffith into the castle to see the destruction firsthand. Griffith then orders them to withdraw while helping Guts. Now in the anime, Griffith tells Guts to take the right, and in the manga, he tells Guts to take the left. This is important because in the manga, Zod's left arm is cut off, whereas in the anime, it's his right arm. Now why is this important? Well, after Skull Knight saved Guts and Casca from the eclipse, we see Zod reattaching his left arm. In Zod's dream, he has his left horn cut off by Griffith. And when Guts loses his arm during the eclipse, it's his left one. I've talked about this symbolism before, so I think the anime made a mistake here in thinking that it was irrelevant in which arm got cut off. Their rationale was probably something to the effect of, well, he's gonna reattach it anyway, so who cares which one it is? But I actually think there's symbolic relevance to which one is cut off, and it has to be the left arm. So they kinda screwed that up. It's also important to recognize that Griffith is still the better swordsman at this point in time, as evidenced by the fact that he was able to cut off Zod's arm, something that Guts couldn't do, which means that Guts doesn't officially surpass Griffith until their farewell duel. And even one could argue that Griffith wasn't at full strength because of the inner turmoil that he was going through at the notion that Guts could be lost. So who really knows? Now Zod notices the Egg of the King and decides it's time to leave. Now there's a slight difference in Zod's prophecy. In the anime, he says, "It's your destiny to face your death. You cannot escape your fate." In the manga, he says, "Death will pay you a visit, a death you can never escape." The Band of the Hawk then enters the castle, with Casca going to Griffith's side. Now in the manga, when Guts approaches Griffith, Casca slaps him away. In the anime, she just tells him to go away. And that pretty much ends the episode. Now this episode starts off with two noblemen discussing the events at the Tudor army stronghold with Foss. Now in the manga, Foss is not involved in this discussion. Guts walks by, gets provoked by one of the noblemen, and uses his crutch to crush his foot. The nobleman looks to retaliate, but is put in his place by a menacing glare. Nothing new here. Now Guts looks to visit Griffith, but various officials, bishops, and ministers are preoccupying his time at the moment. Guts, obviously, cares not for rules and decorum, so he knocks out 2 castle guards with ease. Casca henceforth punches Guts in the face, and proceeds to cry as she wonders why Griffith values Guts so much over her and everyone else. Guts then swings his sword on a set of castle stair steps as he thinks of his past encounters with Casca. Griffith walks in, the two discuss Nosferatu Zod, gods and demons, just like the manga. Guts explains that the Baelitz scared off Zod as the swordsman remembers the prophecy that Zod foretold. Guts then wonders why Griffith would lay down his life for a single soldier. Griffith uses a rhetorical device to dodge the question. Now, it's often said that love doesn't need a reason, it just is. So it's kind of interesting because you get a build up to their relationship in the way that Griffith will do whatever it takes to save Guts. And it's a nice bit of foreshadowing as well, because he's going to go to the greatest of lengths to make sure that Guts never leaves his side because, well, just because. And that just because, in a lot of ways, is because of a burgeoning loving relationship. Of course, they're 2 guys, but as I've speculated in other videos, maybe Griffith is embodying the spirits of someone from long ago, and maybe the same situation is for Guts as well. So anyway, back on track, the King of Midland shows his gratitude towards Griffith and the Band of the Hawk. He introduces his brother Urius. Now, as we know from the manga, his name is Julius, but in the anime, they call him Urius. Griffith notices Charlotte hiding in the shadows, but the king formally introduces her. Now, as they walk away, Griffith catches Charlotte as she trips and is slapped by Julius, or Urius, for laying his hands on the princess. Now here's the first difference of note that we have. Now in the manga, we see Julius get stopped by Foss, and they have their discussion about the upcoming autumn hunt, and how the King of Midland is going to ask Griffith to be the accompanying army that comes with him. And this could pave the way to him becoming a general. They then concoct the plan to have him assassinated by a stray arrow. Now, this event doesn't go away in the anime, however, it's sort of rearranged. So instead of this event happening now, we skip to the moment in which Guts is on top of the roof, thinking about Griffith and what it means to be with him and the Band of the Hawk. And as you'll find out in the next episode, the discussion with Foss doesn't happen until an episode later. Now, after the pontificating by Guts, we then have some anime original content. And surprise, surprise, it's more of Adon again. Like I said in episode 5, much of the anime is sort of building up the Tudor army, or as they're called, Tudor army sometimes. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Adon gets a lot more screen time and a lot more anime original content. Still, at this point in the manga, we don't even know who Adon is. But in the anime, this is like the 3rd or 4th time we've seen him already, so it's kind of interesting how he gets a lot more of the limelight and they make him more of an antagonist who needs to be defeated, as opposed to the manga where he just kind of shows up and then it's like, okay, it's over, he's gone. Now, Adon is tasked with defending another Tudor army stronghold. He explains the importance of the stronghold in controlling a road that allows troops from Midland to reach Doldry Castle. But with the Tudor army in possession of said road, it exposes the heart of Midland. Now, while Adon thinks this fortress is impregnable, an anonymous soldier worries about a flank attack, possibly from a man-made raft, which, of course, Adon just laughs off and thinks it's absolutely ludicrous. Now, in the brush, we see the Band of the Hawk. Corcus and the others point out that the heavy-equipped Golem Knights failed to capture this castle, and subsequently lost 2/3 of their own men on the bridge. So everyone's a little bit nervous about this mission. However, in a very stoic manner, Griffith steps forward, confident as ever, and says that it's their turn to dispose of the enemy. And that's the end of episode 7. So about 3/4 of the episode was pretty much verbatim, just like the manga, not really any differences whatsoever. However, at the ending there, we got a little bit of deviation. Julius and Foss's meeting is postponed an episode, it's rearranged, and we get some anime original content with Adon again. Alright, so this is episode 8, and like the end of episode 7, this is anime original content. Now, if you remember from episode 7, the Hawks were trying to take this castle because it's a pivotal road that leads to Doldry Castle. Now the Hawks Raiders stretch out rope across the river so that they can cross more easily. Now Adon does not consider the possibility of a flank attack, and so thusly feels confident that Midland will not take this vital castle. After the Raiders complete their task, they send a message to Griffith to move on to the next phase. Griffith's army then stations themselves on a hill and starts chanting to distract the enemy. At first, Adon wants to send out his troops to confront the enemy, but he soon realizes that this is probably a trap to lure him out, thus making the castle's defenses weaker. Therefore, he decides to ignore them for now, which seems like a reasonable idea. After the Hawks Raiders cross the river, it's time for them to make their decisive move. Now, funny little tidbit here, there's a hilarious line in the Berserk outtakes that is simply hilarious. I'm gonna put it right here just so you can see.
He's gonna jerk me off!
Alright, so moving on. Upon hearing that the Hawks Raiders have crossed the river, Griffith commands his troops to withdraw. Now, with the threat gone, it seems like, they're in the clear. However, the Hawks Raiders pose as fake messengers, thus allowing Guts to enter the castle and start wrecking shop. After opening the front gate, they give the signal to Griffith to rush the castle from the front. And with this two-pronged attack, the Band of the Hawk obliterates the Tudor soldiers, as Guts and Griffith meet each other's gaze in a most epic moment. With little recourse, Adon decides to flee the battle via a secret water channel, and as we've seen before, this is basically his trademark. Now with this decisive victory, the Band of the Hawk has driven a wedge in the Tudor army territory, and thusly opened a path towards Doldrey. Once Adon returns to Doldrey, Boscan excoriates him for losing the Black Fortress so easily. Now in the manga, we don't meet General Boscan until chapter 23, after Adon's brother Samson dies in battle. Now with us being on episode 8 of the anime, we're still roughly at the chapter 7 mark of the manga. So that's quite a jump. We're seeing Boscan quite a bit earlier than we would in the manga. And again, I actually like this decision. It sort of builds upon his lore a little more. It makes him more of an antagonist, someone that's going to be hard to defeat in the future. Now, back in Midland, Griffith is raised to the rank of Count as Julius finds out that the Hawks are going to be the escort for the King's Autumn Hunt. Of course, Julius cannot accept this. Having a commoner oversee the hunt is just unacceptable. And when Foss plants the idea that he might become a general, he starts to ponder the idea of killing Griffith with a straight arrow. Again, this is another scheme that's devised by Foss, but Julius kind of takes it and makes it his own. And with that, that's the end of the episode. Of course, we had a lot of anime original content, so that's a lot of new stuff right there. But the stuff that they did adapt from the manga was pretty much in line with what we've seen before. So, on to the next episode. Episode 9 starts off with the Autumn Hunt, which matches up quite well with Chapter 8. Guts emphasizes his boredom and explains that he'd much rather be swinging his sword in the battlefield than doing this right now. Quercus decides to excoriate him for risking his life so recklessly, and not enjoying the fruits of their labor. Griffith then starts a conversation with Charlotte, as the tender girl explains that this is her first time hunting, and it doesn't seem like she likes it too much. Griffith shows Charlotte how to blow on a leaf as Casca looks over at them. Now in the anime, she displays a smile and then decides to walk off. But in the manga, she looks a little more conflicted, almost a little bit jealous in a way, so I know at the end of the day it's the same effect, but it is kind of interesting that there is no smile in the manga. Charlotte's horse then gets spooked by the fox as Griffith goes chasing after her. Julius then looks over at his assassin and gives him the authority to take out Griffith. Now Griffith manages to stop Charlotte's horse as the princess expresses her gratitude. The hidden assassin then shoots an arrow into Griffith's chest and Griffith falls into the water. Now the situation seems very dire at first, until Griffith reveals that he's quite fine, and that's thanks to the baylet that acted as his shield. Griffith then identifies the poison on the arrow tip, making him suspect that someone had nefarious intentions. Griffith then catches the gaze of Julius, and immediately ponders the idea that he may have paid the assassin to do this. Julius then excoriates the assassin about the failed attempt on Griffith's life. After dismissing him, Julius feels as though Griffith was looking down upon him after the incident. It almost felt like Griffith was staring at him like a hawk, gazing at his prey. Now when Guts meets Griffith in his chamber, Griffith talks about all the books that he's read, including one that seems to resemble Kama Sutra. However, this tidbit did not make it into the anime, so small little difference there. But again, nothing major. Griffith then explains that he wants Guts to kill a man for him. Now, I'm going to play the audio for this clip right here because I want you guys to hear something.
Well, my friend, I want to ask you to kill a man for me.
Notice how Griffith calls Guts his friend, which he does not do in the manga. And for good reason, Griffith has no friends. A fact that we come to realize in the coming chapters. It actually happens really soon. So it is interesting that the anime decided to add this line because it sort of contradicts his whole philosophy. Now, I believe in the anime he says, "I have no true friend." We'll have to talk about that when we get there. I can't remember the exact phrasing. It is a weird thing, though, because presumably they read the manga beforehand, so they would know that Griffith doesn't consider anyone his friend. It might have just been a slip-up, they just probably forgot about it. It's innocuous when you hear it. You don't immediately connect the points, but, I feel like it is a little bit of a drop of the ball there. Like, I feel like that should have been removed, but, it is what it is. Griffith then reveals that the assassin used colabobean extract to coat the arrow that they used against him. And now he wants Guts to eliminate the man responsible for this whole incident. The man second in line to the throne, Julius. And that's the end of episode 9. Alright, so this is episode 10 of the Berserk 1997 anime. As a reminder, Griffith wants Guts to kill the man second in line to the throne, Count Julius. Guts sneaks up on the rooftops as he notices Julius having a sparring match with his son, Adonis. After knocking down his son, Julius grabs him by the hair and calls him a disgrace. Fatherly love, you know what I mean? Hassan wants Julius to show the boy some mercy, but Julius cannot let up since he'll be the future leader of the White Dragon Knights, and possibly even Princess Charlotte's spouse, i.e. the future King of Midland. After being beaten up again, Adonis is consoled by Hassan, who instructs him not to resent his father. Meanwhile, we notice Guts watching/listening into all this. Now at this point, we have a divergence. In the anime, we cut to a scene with Griffith attending a banquet. At said banquet, he meets Laban and Owen, two high-ranking military officials. Now in the manga, we don't meet these two until chapter 23, the Battle for Duldry. And I believe there's also anime original content in which we meet them again before that battle. So once again, like Baskan, these two are showing up in the manga a little bit earlier than expected. Now in the manga, before Guts assassinates Julius, he has a brief moment in which he thinks about his relationship with Gambino, and how it's very similar to Adonis' relationship with Julius. This is really important in my mind because it establishes a bit of empathy. Guts is seeing himself in Adonis' shoes, which makes the next set of events feel all the more impactful. Because for Guts, he's beginning to have second thoughts in his mind about what he's about to do, and it sort of plants the seeds for his eventual departure from the Band of the Hawk. Now, inside the estate, Hassan implores Julius to have more restraint with his son, and Julius seems to agree with this. Julius then stares into the fire and is reminded of Griffith's piercing gaze. After which, Guts then enters the room, fully cloaked to conceal his identity. Julius attempts to defend himself, but Guts is much too fast, as he slices him across the chest. With the hood falling off of Guts' head, Julius determines that he's one of Griffith's men as he falls to his death. Adonis then peeks his head through the door, wondering what's going on, as he calls for help. But Guts drives his sword right into the center of his chest. Now in the manga, Miura obscured Adonis' features in the shadows, so it was reasonable to assume that Guts couldn't identify who he was. Whereas in the anime, Adonis is fully revealed within the light. So it seems rather odd that Guts would just drive his sword into him mindlessly and then be shocked that he killed the boy. I mean, unless Guts has really bad vision and he just couldn't make out his features. But when you look at these images side by side, it almost seems unequivocal. It's like, how could he make that mistake? Because Miura's intention is to make it seem like a mistake. Guts was generally surprised that he killed the boy, but in the anime, I don't know, I mean, it almost seems a little more intentional. Guts then holds the dying boy's hand briefly before he passes away. He then fights his way through the estate by slashing anyone that gets in his way. Now, after seeing what the intruder did, Hassan demands that they kill him before he escapes. Guts evades all his captors and eventually kicks his way into a sewer. Unfortunately though, he hits his head on the back of a rock and gets knocked out. Guts then dreams of training with Gambino, similar to how Adonis was just training with his father. A shadowy figure resembling Zod stabs Gambino and eventually does the same to Guts. Now when the camera zooms in on the monster's face, we see that it's Zod's body with Guts' face on it, which is implying that Guts is starting to turn into a monster. Because he's become a tool for Griffith, a tool for Griffith's dream that is, he's tossed morality to the side. And again, this is planting the seeds for Guts' eventual departure. Inside of a tavern, Casca excoriates Guts for not showing up to join practice today. The disheveled Guts then enters the tavern and wonders where Griffith is at. Guts then heads over to the ball, and walks towards Griffith with the intention of talking to him. Casca stops him, saying that he'll embarrass Griffith in his current state. Charlotte then expresses her dissatisfaction with war and Man's barbarous side. Now Griffith says that Man has a savage side to protect that which he considers most precious, and for him, it's to accomplish his dream. Now for some people, they only see life and death, and in Griffith's mind, they're already dead since they have no dreams. And this really hits home for Guts. Griffith then tells Charlotte that his fellow soldiers are not friends. For a true friend is someone who has their own reason for living, a reason beyond him. The Band of the Hawk lives to serve Griffith's dream, so therefore they are precluded from being his friend. And again, if we remember the last episode, Griffith calling Guts his friend was kind of a weird thing. I mean, it's something that they really should have got rid of in the anime. Now, for someone to truly be Griffith's friend, they have to be equal to him in every regard. News then comes in that Count Julius was assassinated, along with his son. And Griffith is quite happy by this, as it means his plan has come to fruition. Sometime later, Griffith meets up with Minister Foss. Now Foss speculates that the one who attempted to kill Griffith during the autumn hunt was not a Tudor spy, but in fact someone within the Midland court. Griffith brushes this off, as Foss begins to wonder if Griffith suspects him. And sure enough, Griffith stares down Foss with the same gaze that he gave Julius prior to having him killed. So for those who haven't seen the anime in full, you have to wonder at this point, is Foss next on Griffith's hit list? And this episode ends with Guts staring up at his sword. So this episode saw quite a few differences from the manga. But anyway, with that, on to episode 11. Before Griffith heads off into battle, Princess Charlotte offers him a keepsake from her mother. Griffith will hold on to the keepsake for now, but vows to return it once he has completed his campaign. Charlotte then implores Casca to protect Lord Griffith, as Casca says that she will do so with her life. The Queen then excoriates Charlotte for giving a gift away to a man born from humble origins. Now as Griffith and the Band of the Hawk head out, they added a couple of extra scenes in the anime, but nothing of consequence. They then confront the Blue Whale Knights as the skies above look quite ominous. Casca then complains of abdominal pain, as it seems like she's having her period. The two sides begin their charge as a massive onslaught ensues. And goddamn, the anime does an amazing job with this sequence. I mean, it is so freaking good. Especially the music playing in the background, it just really matches that scene nicely. I believe it's called Murder from the Berserk soundtrack, and it just hits all the right notes, especially in this scene right here. Now in the anime, Judo finds himself in a bit of trouble, but Rickert comes to his rescue. Chadley Rickert doing Chadley things, I mean, what else is new? Adon then makes his way over to Casca, and starts to degrade her based on the fact that she's a woman. Furthermore, he insinuates that Casca is using sexual favors to ascend the ranks in the military. In Casca's weakened condition, Adon takes the upper hand. Now even though Mira paints Adon as a buffoon, he does have a reasonable amount of strength and skill. I mean, he takes one swing and just annihilates several members of the Band of the Hawk, so, you can't mess with him. He might be a buffoon, but he's definitely strong. Adon then antagonizes Casca some more before going in for the final blow. Luckily for her, Guts is there to protect her from danger. Guts pushes Adon back and says he wants to keep fighting until the voices are all gone. Adon then tries out his secret technique, Ganzan Senpu, otherwise known as the rock-cutting whirlwind. Guts cuts through his weapon with ease, stopping him dead in his tracks. Casca's stamina eventually runs out as she begins falling off of the cliff's edge. Guts grabs onto her as Adon shoots an arrow in his left side. Well, it's the left side in the anime, but it's the right side in the manga. The two fall into the river as the rain starts coming down. Guts pulls her out and starts giving her CPR. After stabilizing her, he realizes that she has a fever and takes her inside of a tree hollow to dry out. Realizing she's gonna get sick, he takes off her clothes as well. And upon doing this, it's revealed that she's bleeding from her vagina, which makes Guts instantly realize how hard it is to be a woman. Griffith hears the news, as two Midland soldiers say that if they are truly the strongest soldiers within the Band of the Hawk, they should make it through this ordeal with ease. And with this, the episode ends with Guts cradling Casca within the tree. So episode 12 starts with a flashback, with Griffith imploring Casca to do as she wishes with her own life from now on. Now the first difference is that Casca's body is covered with Guts' cloak, as opposed to Leaf's in the manga. The second difference is that we don't get a full view of Casca's breasts like we did in the manga. Casca gets upset by the situation and starts throwing various materials at him, including a knife. Guts says she's acting irrationally as she reminds him that she didn't ask to be a woman. After Casca calms down a bit, she reveals that she joined the Band of the Hawk because of Griffith. Now Casca comes from humble beginnings, with her village being raided constantly and many people dying of famine. One day, a nobleman offered to take Casca in as a servant. However, it didn't take long before the nobleman attempted to rape Casca in the carriage. Now look, rape is an absolutely terrible thing, but why did that nobleman try to rape her right there and then? Why didn't he wait till, he got her back to his castle, in the dead of night or something? What? I don't know, he just couldn't help himself? I mean, Jesus Christ, man, keep it in your pants for, 5 minutes. Anyway, back on track. Just before the nobleman has his way with her, Griffith steps in to stop things. But instead of killing the man, he throws down his sword and implores Casca to protect that which is important to her. After killing the nobleman, Griffith implores her to do as she wishes. And from this day forward, she decides to join the band of the Hawk. The Hawk eventually takes a job from a sleazy man with sordid taste in young boys, Genin, the governor of Doldry Castle. Later on, Griffith mourns over the body of a dead boy who died because of his dream. Not long after that, Casca finds out that Griffith was raising money by indulging in Genin's sexual perversions. He later reveals that he's doing this for hundreds, no thousands of lives that hang in the balance because of his decisions. Now, here's a pretty important difference. In the anime, Griffith says that he'd rather sacrifice himself than watch any other innocent people die in the name of his dream.
But I'd rather sacrifice myself than watch any more innocent children die in the name of my dream.
This line of dialogue just does not exist within the manga, and for good reason. I mean, we all know that he's going to sacrifice the entire band of the Hawk for his dream. So why even put that out there? Why even say, I'd rather sacrifice myself? We know that's not true, unless, the anime is trying to intentionally subvert you and try to make you think that he's going to be this nice guy for the entire anime and nothing's ever going to happen. I mean, it's possible. I mean, I guess it does come off as more shocking, but again, kind of like the whole friend thing in the previous episode, it's not really in line with his philosophy. I mean, for example, if he truly believed this, he would have had no problem with Guts leaving the band of the Hawk. Because if he truly wanted to sacrifice himself for others, then he would make sure that the safety of others is paramount. But we all know that Griffith is going to do whatever it takes to achieve his dream. And it is kind of an interesting thing because I have noticed this with the manga and the anime. The manga definitely gives you a lot of clues that Griffith is going to go through this evil transformation at some point. I mean, obviously, if you read the manga, you read the Black Swordsman arc, so you know what's going to happen anyway. But there's these little scenes where you see the evilness of Griffith permeating up to the surface. Whereas in the anime, they really go out of their way to make him seem like this nice guy. So, just a different taste, I guess. I mean, I wish maybe they would fix a little bit of it, but at the end of the day, I mean, the 1997 anime is still goated in my opinion. So, yeah, let's move on. Now, Casca believes in Griffith's dream with all her heart, and wants to be by his side as his metaphorical sword. Now, she reveals that she became envious of Guts when he won his praise so easily. Now, in the anime, Casca uses the word despise Guts, whereas in the anime, she envies Guts. It's a small difference, but despise almost means you just hate someone for no good reason whatsoever. And Casca did have a good reason. She envied Guts. She wanted to be in Guts' position. She wanted Griffith to trust her like he trusted Guts. And Guts won that praise and that adulation so easily, whereas she worked for years with Griffith and, couldn't get it. So I think the wording probably should have stuck with the original translation there. Now, Casca won't let Guts take Griffith's dream down, as she wonders why he's so important to him. Guts then hides Casca from some Tudor soldiers, as he says they're going to make their escape at nightfall. And with that, that's the end of episode 12. Guts and Casca make their way through the forest as Guts criticizes Casca for being a woman. A Tudor soldier then shoots an arrow at Casca as Guts knocks her out of the way. Unfortunately, they are surrounded on all sides by a horde of Tudor soldiers. The Tudor soldiers descend upon the two as Guts and Casca display their superb fighting technique. Realizing that his base troops aren't going to get the job done, Adon calls upon his brother Samson to handle the situation. And you gotta wonder how tall Samson is. I mean, he is just an absolute behemoth of a man. Samson attacks with his great flail, but Guts knocks it back as if it were a game of tennis. Eventually, though, Guts crushes the flail into 1,000,000 pieces, and charges forward to cut Samson's head asunder. With this small window, Guts implores Casca to run away. Back to her swordmaster, back to Griffith. After she makes her escape, Guts tells the Tudor soldiers that his sword is very dull, but it's 3 times as thick and heavy as a normal sword. So if they don't die right away, they're gonna wish they would have. While Casca gets pursued by the Tudor soldiers, Guts continues his onslaught. Casca eventually gets caught by 3 Tudor soldiers as the situation looks pretty grim. She's physically exhausted and feels powerless in her current condition. And that's the end of episode 13. I mean, there really weren't any changes from the manga, so we don't really have much to talk about. So episode 14 starts off with Casca remembering Guts' words. And this gives her the strength to resist her captors. Now she grabs a jagged stick and jams it into the eye of the man on top of her. And I gotta say, the VA's scream here is just top-notch stuff. It had me rolling in laughter for a little bit. Now in the anime, Judo saves Casca by throwing one of his daggers in the Tudor soldier's face, whereas in the manga, the Band of the Hawk fills them with arrows. While Guts is in the midst of eliminating the 100 Tudor soldiers, he begins to wonder why he's risking his life so cheaply. And again, there's another nice Berserk outtake that I'm going to put in here for laughs.
What am I doing here? What are any of us doing here? My God. Ow. That really hurts. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, The Meaning of Life by Guts.
Casca then implores Judo and the other members to help out Guts since he's all by himself. When dawn breaks, they come upon a grisly sight. They find Guts leaning up against a tree with his sword, but luckily for them, he's still alive, albeit a little bit tired and hurt. The Hawk takes Guts and Casca back to camp, as we find out that Griffith is attending a war council at HQ. Later that night, Judo tells Casca that Griffith sent out a search party for the two, since they are vital members of the Band of the Hawk. Judo then gives Casca some fairy dust as she makes her way over to Guts, who's up sitting on a hill. While the two look upon the Band of the Hawk camp, Guts talks about how everyone has their own little dream, and each light within the camp represents that dream, a campfire of dreams if you will. But the one thing that keeps everything together is the blazing inferno that is Griffith, and his massive dream for attaining his own kingdom. Guts then says that his light is not amongst the thousands here at the campfire, as Casca begins to wonder if he's thinking about leaving the Hawks. Griffith returns to camp early to check up on Guts and Casca, as Casca apologizes for putting her entire battalion in danger. As Guts walks off, Casca then wonders if Guts was serious about leaving the Hawks. Now episode 15 starts off with a battle in front of Doldry Castle. The White Tiger Knights, one of the strongest in all of Midland, is getting their asses handed to them by the Purple Rhino Knights, led by General Bascan. And again, we got a nice little outtake here.
Sir, you do realize you're wearing a very, very faggy outfit!
No!
Now Midland has a prime opportunity to take Doldry since Tudor is on the brink of civil war. Well, in the anime it's a civil war, but in the manga it's a dispute over the next successor for the throne, which I suppose could lead to a civil war, but I feel like those are two entirely different things. I mean, am I wrong here? Civil war implies that the country is actually fighting with each other and killing each other, whereas a dispute for the successor is, more or less a political thing. Now, even with this golden opportunity, they still face an uphill challenge defeating General Bascan and the Purple Rhino Knights. Griffith offers up his services to the king to take Doldry. What's more, he claims he only needs the Band of the Hawk to do so. The other generals believe that Griffith is out of his mind for considering such an absurd path, but Laban believes that total war is inevitable anyway. The king then commands the Hawks to head towards Doldry. Afterwards, Laban tells Owen that Griffith is a type of man that only appears once in 100 years. Something out of a fairy tale, a true hero. Casca then tells Guts that Governor Genin of Doldry is the general for the Tudors' northern battlefront, and he's the same man that took advantage of Griffith years ago. Meanwhile, Bascan revokes Adon of his command, and excoriates him for his embarrassing behavior on the battlefront. Genin then instructs Bascan to capture the leader of the Band of the Hawk, Griffith, alive. And he doesn't elaborate any further on this. The battle is ready to take place as Bascan wonders why Genin wants Griffith alive. As Guts looks up at the Band of the Hawk banner, he considers the possibility that this will be his last battle with them. The Hawks Raiders lead the vanguard as Guts cuts his way through the Tudor front line. Bascan heads them off as he knocks off Guts' helmet. Genin then prepares his bodyguards so that he can take command personally on the battlefield. The Band of the Hawk then retreats from the Tudor army, as Genin wants his men to chase after them. The Band of the Hawk then places their backs towards the river, as Guts realizes that Griffith's plan is coming to fruition. With episode 16 starting, the battle rages on at Doldry, as a sandstorm makes visibility extremely difficult. Casca and her troops use this to charge to the front of the castle to take it for themselves. Adon then breaks out of his cell to stop Casca from achieving her goals. Interesting side note, notice that Adon's armor has many sharks adorned on it. Now, I remember subscribing to Puella from SkullKnight.com. She's a Berserk translator, and in her interpretation, instead of this panel saying Shock Adon, it's supposed to say Sharkadon, which makes a bit of sense when you consider what he's wearing. There's literally sharks on his helmet, his shoulders, his knees, so yeah, it's a very interesting thing right there. Casca's unit engages the Blue Whale Knights as Griffith's troops fight the Purple Rhino Knights. Guts continues cutting down soldiers until General Bascan decides to stop his killing rampage. While fighting Casca, Adon remarks that her form is much better than last time. Now in the manga, he determines that she was on her period in the previous battle, but he doesn't connect the dots in the anime. Or possibly the producers of the anime just didn't want to use the word period, who knows. Although the battle with Bascan seems hopeless, Guts has been through tougher circumstances, i.e. his fight with Zod. Adon finds himself in a losing position, so he tricks Casca into thinking he's surrendering. But he uses this opportunity to shoot an arrow into her, an arrow that's got poison on it. Guts' sword then breaks while fighting Bascan, leaving him in desperate straits. Casca gets cornered, but she flips over Adon and finishes him off with a swift blow. Bascan dispatches several soldiers who attempt to help out Guts. Luckily for Guts, Zod, who's standing on a nearby cliff, tosses his massive sword down to his position. Guts then picks up the sword and cuts off the head of both Bascan and his horse. Genin wants his men to fight on, but he soon realizes that Doldry has already fallen to Casca's troops. The Tudor army flees the battlefield as Genin begs for mercy. Griffith then reveals that he merely used Genin in the past to achieve his ends. He then decides to finish him off by putting a sword through his eye. Casca gets emotional seeing the victorious Griffith, saying that he feels so far away. Guts then picks her up and says,
Hey, baby. High noon on my sundial, Casca.
He actually says, let's go meet your leader. Guts stares back at the sword and begins to think that that might have been Zod's sword. Off in the distance, Zod says that the eclipse draws near, and that the Demon Kings will descend soon. Now in the manga, he says that the Demon Advent approaches. Small difference, nothing really changes. Now even though Tudor is finally done and away with, Griffith's battle with Midland's aristocracy is only beginning, with the Queen fully intent on killing him. Episode 17 starts with a parade for the Band of the Hawk, celebrating their victory over the Tudor army. Now in the last episode, the Queen and the various nobles were conspiring to assassinate Griffith. In the manga, we learn that the Queen merely got married to the King of Midland for political reasons. She's not from this land, so she felt very isolated. And although the king was good at ruling, he had no time to devote to his family, leaving the Queen wanting more. She thusly resided within the warmth of Julius, and although she didn't know it at the time, she ended up loving him. So now her revenge is not as the Queen of Midland, but as a woman who lost her lover. Now this material does not show up within the anime. The Queen's justification for killing Griffith, which is revealed in the next episode, is to protect the royal bloodline. So on one hand in the manga, Mira is humanizing the Queen. She lost her lover, so she feels more or less justified for what she's doing. Whereas in the anime, she just seems more evil for the sake of being evil. Protecting an arbitrary bloodline. Back on track, Quercus does the Hulk Hogan pose like he did in the manga. Side note about this, Mira was actually a big fan of wrestling back in the day, and he often put in various references within the manga. Usually you'll see them with Puck's various antics, but every once in a while you see one of the normal characters doing it. Guts then marvels at Griffith's vision and how he was able to pull off the impossible. Charlotte waves to Griffith as he passes by, but he's unable to see her. Foss then receives a most troubling letter, one that makes him panic and fear. Later on, a celebratory ball is held for the various members of the Band of the Hawk. Although it seems like a strange setting for most of the mercenaries, Griffith blends in seamlessly. Guts feels uncomfortable with all the attention he's receiving from the fairer sex, and he decides to bail. Now, even though Griffith is the kingdom's guardian angel, Laban worries that he sticks out like a sore thumb, and that the aristocracy will start to scheme against him. Casca escapes some noblemen and makes her way over to Guts, asking if he'll pretend to be her partner. Guts stares at her absent-mindedly as she puts an elbow in his neck. Now Casca feels a little bit silly wearing a dress instead of armor, but Guts says that she looks very pretty. Now Guts stayed for the ball because he wanted to see Griffith's dream manifest to the very end. as Casca wonders if he's truly serious about leaving the Hawks. Casca then heads inside to listen to the king's speech, as we learn that Guts is here for another reason. A secret reason that none of the other members of the Band of the Hawk know about. During the king's speech, the king raises Griffith to the rank of general, and says that all the soldiers will be knighted and raised to peerage. Now in the manga, he refers to them as the White Phoenix Knights, whereas in the anime, it's the White Hawk Knights. Guts and Griffith then meet each other's gaze as they smile at each other. The king toasts the Hawks as Griffith takes a drink from his chalice and immediately falls to the ground. Episode 18 starts off with Casca grabbing onto Griffith's body as she's crying. The man who poisoned Griffith's drink is then taken out by Guts. The various aristocrats celebrate their victory over Griffith, as Minister Foss looks positively ill. Foss takes his leave as the aristocrats are happy to be done in a way with a mere commoner who became general.
Bazich, please, don't hate the player, hate the game. Who let the dog?
And again, like we said in the last episode, the queen has done this for the noble bloodline, whereas in the manga, she was doing it for Julius. A fire then breaks out as the queen sees Griffith off in the distance. Griffith faked his own death, and he reminds them that there are no spectators on the battlefield. Now after she perishes, he goes up to a shaking Foss. Now Griffith didn't know what he had planned for him, but he suspected that Foss was his enemy the moment that he met his eyes before going off into battle. So it turns out that Foss has been dancing to Griffith's tune this entire time, and in truth, Foss actually fears him. Griffith then returns Foss's daughter, Elise, back to him. Now in the anime, we never see Elise's face. You just hear her voice and you see Foss run over to something. Whereas in the manga, we actually get a full visual of her. Guts then ties up loose ends by killing off the mercenaries who kidnapped Foss's daughter. Griffith then wonders if he's cruel for carrying out all these ill deeds, but Guts reminds him that it's all part of the plan to accomplish his dream. Griffith returns to the Band of the Hawk as Casca cries within his arms. Afterwards, a ceremony is then held for the queen, as many are left to wonder who did this. 1 month later, Guts decides to make his departure from the Hawk. Casca sees him and decides to chase him down. Although they're not the greatest of friends, she reminds him of all the stuff that they've been through together. Yet for Guts, he cannot remain buried under the weight of Griffith's dream. Episode 19 starts off with Guts, Judo, and Corcus in a tavern. Now in the manga, Judo and Corcus meet Guts outside as they offer to talk with him. Casca is then seen running after Griffith to hopefully mend the situation. Of course, this doesn't happen in the anime. We just presume it happens. Now Guts has enjoyed the past 3 years with the Hawk, so he's in no way dissatisfied. Corcus excoriates him for not enjoying the finer things in life. Guts has been fighting his whole life since he was a child, so it's really all he knows how to do. Yet being in the presence of Griffith has made him realize that he wants more out of life. He wants to be considered Griffith's equal after all. Corcus believes that Guts is overextending his hand. The notion of anyone being Griffith's equal is just absurd to him. After he leaves, Judo reveals that Corcus once led his own band of mercenaries. It wasn't a big band of mercenaries, but it was something that he could call his own. Judo has always been above average at everything he attempts, but he was never the best at anything, so he eventually joined the Hawks. He joined a man who was the best at something. Judo then tells Guts that he should ask out Casca. Guts believes that Casca is Griffith's girl, but Griffith must marry the princess if he ever hopes to become king one day. Now in the manga, Judo begins to connect some of the dots and contemplates the notion that Guts and Griffith may have killed Julius, the ministers, and the queen. But eventually, he brushes this whole notion off. In the anime, this doesn't happen. Before Guts leaves Windham, he's stopped by the main members of the Band of the Hawk. Rickards is especially sad about this development. Interesting little side note here, I don't know if I missed this in the earlier episodes, but Guts calls Rickards Ricket.
Ricket.
Now while the others are upset, Corcus says that Guts is not special and he'll never be like Griffith. Guts looks over at Casca for a moment, possibly considering saying something, but he doesn't utter a word. Griffith then makes it clear that he won Guts by the way of the sword, so if he wants his freedom, he'll have to win a duel here and now. The two draw their swords as the sun rises off in the distance. Now in the manga, there's a tree in this shot, and we can also see the Tower of Rebirth in the background, a tower that Griffith is going to be visiting quite shortly. Casca steps in between the two, telling them that they're acting recklessly, but Pippin pulls her away so that they can have their duel. Judo understands that Casca is going through quite the change right now, as in the past, she would have never questioned Griffith's decision. Now Casca wants Griffith to win so that things will remain unchanged, but then she begins to wonder if that's truly what she wants. If she truly wants Guts to stay with them. Griffith determines that the battle will be decided in the first strike, but if he makes the smallest of mistakes, he could accidentally kill Guts. In the manga, we see a hypothetical situation play out, in which Griffith cuts Guts' head asunder. The battle begins with Griffith lunging forward. Griffith attempts to deflect Guts' sword, but Guts easily cuts through his blade, and stops his own just before killing Griffith. And with this, Griffith sits in disbelief, as Guts bids him farewell. Casca screams for Guts to come back, but the hulking swordsman continues walking without missing a beat. Guts is confident that Griffith will walk again, and in doing so, he'll accomplish the dream that he so sorely wants. Now in the anime, we skip straight to the scene where Griffith sneaks into Princess Charlotte's room and has sex with her. In the manga, Guts is seen sitting in the forest, thinking about the Band of the Hawk. He then meets a cryptic man known as the Skull Knight, who foretells of an event 1 year from now known as the Eclipse. A torrent of madness will sweep the land, and all the members of the Band of the Hawk, including Griffith, will be there to bear witness. The Skull Knight implores him to struggle on, against that which will test his resolve to the utmost. And with that, he takes his leave. Now, the Skull Knight makes no appearances in the 1997 anime, which means that he's not going to be there to save Guts during the eclipse. The eclipse that happens in the last episode of the anime. Anyway, like I said earlier, Griffith has sex with Charlotte, and as you might expect, things are much more graphic in the manga. In the morning, Griffith is quite distraught by Guts' departure. He then leaves the estate, but his careless behavior lands him in some hot water, as the Royal Guards of Midland now have him in their custody. Alright, so now we're on episode 20. Now we have a major divergence at the beginning of the episode. In the manga, the king goes to Charlotte's room and finds out that she had sex with Griffith. He henceforth has Griffith imprisoned and takes out his anger on him by lashing him multiple times. In fact, the anime avoids painting him in a negative light altogether. And trust me, he is quite the vile man in the manga. More vile than the queen. Which is kind of interesting because when you watch the anime, the queen looks a lot more vicious and vile than the king because you have no evidence that the king is an evil person. But it's actually the other way around. Especially when you consider the fact that the queen was only taking revenge on Griffith because he killed Julius, her lover. Where the king was just doing it because he wanted Charlotte for himself. The dude is just straight up an incestual pedophile, a factoid that does not go unnoticed by Griffith. Now it's understandable why they eliminated this material from the anime, but they could have still shown the king whipping Griffith at the very least. I feel like they could have done that, just to show that he's not this benevolent man. I guess the only evidence you have that he's somewhat evil is the fact that he sends the Midland army to chase after Griffith and the Band of the Hawk. So you know when Guts and the Band of the Hawk take Griffith from the torture chamber? It's supposed to be Wyald that chases them down. Instead, it's just the Midland army, so I guess indirectly the king seems like a bad guy, but they just don't give a lot of concrete evidence. The next part that occurs in the manga that somewhat shows up in the anime is the attempted assassination attempt on the Band of the Hawk by the king's order. Now, this event still does happen, it's referenced in a later episode, but it's very brief by comparison. There are also several torture scenes that are skipped. However, we do get to see some in the next episode as well. So with that stuff out of the way, we can finally actually start the episode itself, which lines up with the beginning of chapter 41. An arms tournament is taking place for the amusement of a local lord. Valencia, otherwise known as the King of Massacre, is getting ready for his next fight. Now in the manga, he's slated to fight Salat, whereas in the anime, it's just some random dude. Now in the manga, Salat defeats Valencia, and then he's challenged by Guts. In the anime, Guts just decides to skip this one dude in line and defeats Valencia himself. And as we're about to find out, Salat does not show up in the 1997 anime. I'm not sure, I don't know why they decided to eliminate him. Maybe they just didn't want to introduce any unnecessary plot threads that wouldn't get resolved within 25 episodes? I'm just not really sure. Maybe they just didn't have enough airtime to fit it in there. Could be a variety of reasons. The Lord then asks Guts to join his forces for future battles, but the hulking swordsman declines. Now in the anime, Guts returns to Goto's house. Whereas in the manga, he finds out that the Band of the Hawk caused an uprising about a year ago, and were subsequently kicked out of Windham. Now, we don't find out about Goto and Erica until chapter 48 in the manga, and it comes in the form of a flashback when Guts is with Casca. Now, Guts does some training by a waterfall with Erica, and she's releasing gigantic logs down towards him. Later on, Guts thinks about how his whole life revolves around using a sword. While Goto fixes Guts' sword, he tells him how he likes sparks, and how it feels like his life is bursting into the air. Guts too uses sparks from his sword to define himself, and in a way, it gives his life meaning. Now in the manga, we go back to the conversation with Guts and Casca. In the anime, Guts says his farewell to Goto. Goto encourages him not to waste his life, as a messenger comes in with an urgent request. The messenger mentions a mercenary band that staged a revolt in Windham, and they're being led by a woman, and they're called the Band of the Hawk. And with this, we're finally back in line with the manga again, as we see the Band of the Hawk licking their wounds from long, arduous battles. Judo checks in on Casca as she notes that Griffith is being kept in an underground prison.
They said that Griffith is being held in the oldest level of the lowest dungeon beneath my ass.
Unholy moans have been coming from the jail, but in the past month, they've stopped. Judo encourages her to eat and rest up, but the psychological toll has been hard on her as she passes out. Now Quercus is skeptical that they can save Griffith, as a group of mercenaries start attacking the Hawk. In the manga, this raid is led by Salat. He subsequently attacks Casca with a flurry of blows, and eventually pins her down onto the ground. In the anime, it's just some random dude who pins her down. Guts kicks the dude off of Casca, as the random dude falls into a fire and burns to his death. In the manga, he kicks Salat off of Casca, and once again they have another duel. Although this one's a bit more exciting than the previous one. Alright, so now we're on episode 21. Instead of Guts fighting Salat, he fends off a horde of soldiers until they decide to flee. The Band of the Hawk celebrates Guts' return.
So, which one of you is Goku?
Judo then gets Guts up to speed, explaining how the Band of the Hawk is a mere shell of its former self. Judo then tells him how they were driven out of Windham, and how Griffith was charged with high treason. Now Quercus is not too pleased with Guts' return, saying he can hardly think of him as a comrade. Now in the manga, we find out that Gaston has abandoned his clothing store, and he did this because he wanted to help out the Band of the Hawk. Judo then urges Guts to talk to Casca. Back in Midland, we see the Torturer poking and prodding at Griffith with various torture devices. And you'll notice that this torturer is different than the man we see in the manga. Casca then challenges Guts to a duel, as she shows him no restraint. Guts then trips her onto the ground as he wonders what's going on. She blames Guts for turning his back on Griffith and destroying the Band of the Hawk.
Goddamn front line is God, you shut you!
Casca says that Griffith is no good without Guts, as her sword pierces his flesh. Now Casca has come to the realization that she no longer has a place by Griffith's side, and so her dream has died. Not only that, it died a very long time ago. Now Casca is tired of protecting Griffith's dream, especially considering the fact that she doesn't know if Griffith is even alive anymore. So she goes to the cliff's edge and falls off. Luckily, Guts is there to rescue her. Casca calls Guts a fool for always spilling his blood for her. The two then kiss each other and, well, you know.
If I were you, I'd tap that ass. Oh, I'm sorry. My ghetto came out.
And for obvious reasons, the sex scenes are eliminated from the anime. This also means that the scene where Guts remembers Donovan raping him is not there as well. And it's not too surprising because Donovan didn't show up in the flashback for episode 4, so why would he just randomly show up now? And because of this, Guts also doesn't choke Casca during the middle of their coitus. So the whole thing about Guts and Casca licking each other's wounds does not show up, which I feel like is an important piece of their character development, but again, they probably had a runtime, they didn't have enough time to fit everything in, so they had to cut it. Now Guts will never swing his sword for another man again, as he invites Casca to come with him on his journey.
Berserker!
Elsewhere, the Snake Baron lurks in the forest as we see Griffith's Baylet floating in the river. Afterwards, the Band of the Hawk, led by Casca, begin their rescue mission of Griffith. Episode 22 starts off with a single brick in the wall being pushed out from its slot. And from the hole comes a deformed mass of flesh. It refers to Griffith as Sweet Prince as he sees a surrealistic landscape with 4 shadowy figures. And one of these figures, whom we later find out is Void, says that they shall meet again and that they are kinsmen. In the manga, we see a child version of Griffith running through the streets and staring up at his desired castle. This still shows up in the anime, but we don't see it until the eclipse. The Band of the Hawk arrives in the Windham graveyard as they move one of the graves that leads to a secret entrance. Guts shows some concern for Casca's well-being, but Casca is fully capable of carrying out this mission. While running through the sewers, Guts thinks about his previous interactions with Griffith, and how nothing ever stood in his path towards victory. Now in the manga, the Band of the Hawk meets up with Charlotte inside the castle. Now they still meet up with someone inside the castle, but before that happens in the anime, we divert to something else. We go over to Rickert and the other members of the Band of the Hawk. Now while he's getting some water, he sees what looks like a fairy floating above the water. And of course, as the manga readers, we know that this is Rosine. When Rickert returns to camp, the entire Band of the Hawk has been brutalized and killed. He then sees Kim stuck within the jaws of a gigantic monster. Now again, as the manga readers, we recognize him as the Count, otherwise known as the Slug Baron. So it is cool that they did fit the Count within the manga itself, even though they didn't do the Black Swordsman arc. And God, it just makes me wonder, like, how good the Black Swordsman arc could have been if they just followed through with it. If they did some sort of OVA, like 8 episodes, that would have been amazing. Now behind Rickert is a gigantic stag beetle and praying mantis, 2 creatures that show up within the Lost Children's chapters in the manga. And then off on the tree is the glowing elf from before. Rickert is then approached by the apostles as we are transported back to Windham. Now in the manga, Skull Knight shows up here and saves Rickert by driving the apostles off. And you have to wonder to yourself, how the hell does Rickert get out of this situation in the anime? They don't show that, so like, what the hell did he do? Did he just go berserk and annihilate everyone himself? I mean, oh man, it's kind of a plot hole, you know, I'm not gonna lie. Now we're back at the castle in Windham, and in the manga, Princess Charlotte shows up and personally takes Guts, Casca, and the others down to Griffith's chambers. While in the anime, she stays in her room and watches from afar. Judo then takes out some of the guards with his throwing knives. Griffith then wonders how long he's been in this torture chamber. And even though it's been a long time, he's maintained his sanity by focusing on one thing.
Darkness imprisoning me, all that I see, absolute horror.
One person, that is. Guts. Now in the manga, Charlotte volunteers to be taken as a hostage. Now because she's with them in the manga, we find out about the story of Supreme King Geyserich, the man who united the kingdoms back in the day and created an age-old empire. But because she's not with him in the anime, we don't learn about that story. And it's not too surprising, the anime had no plans of going beyond the Golden Age arc, so it doesn't really make sense to open up this new plot thread when you're not really going to follow through with it. And especially considering the fact that they didn't show the Skull Knights in the previous episodes, it really wouldn't make sense to bring up the whole notion of King Geyserich. Now once they get to the prison cell down below, Guts is surprised to find Griffith in a mangled state, especially when he opens up his helmet and stares at his once beautiful face. Upon waking up, Griffith is shocked to see Guts and puts his hand around his neck. In the manga, Judo picks up on this and is quite surprised. So this is a prelude of things to come. However, in the anime, this doesn't show up. Judo doesn't pick up on this. The torturer then locks the door to the cell, as Guts wonders if he's the one who did this. After getting confirmation, Guts drives his sword through the door and kicks the man into the pit. Now before he does this in the manga, he takes his dagger to cut off the torturer's tongue. And he does this as payback for what he did to Griffith's tongue. Archers shoot arrows down as they guard the entire staircase. Guts then goes berserk and starts slaughtering every last man that stands in his way. In the manga, the king sees the devastation that Guts left behind, and orders the Bakiraka to take care of him. Now the Bakiraka do not show up within the anime. And of course, because of this, we don't have the situation in which Charlotte gets hit with a blow dart. We also miss out on a really cool battle with the Bakiraka in the sewers. In addition, we don't have the moments in which the king kills the female Bakiraka member. Another piece of evidence that shows that the king is actually quite the vile man. Now, once the Bakiraka fail within the manga, the king calls upon Wyald and the Black Dog Knights. And for obvious reasons, this doesn't show up in the anime. And this whole skip constitutes the biggest jump in chapters that we have in the anime. Some of the scenes are reworked in the anime, but for the most part, we skip chapters 56 to 69. And with that, to end the episode, the Band of the Hawk escapes Windham with Griffith in their carriage. Episode 23 starts off with the Band of the Hawk escaping from the Midland Army. Of course, in the manga, it's the Black Dog Knights. In the anime, the carriage containing Griffith gets hit with several arrows, as they capture the leader for themselves. The Midland general then reveals Griffith's desecrated body for the entire Hawk to see. Guts bum rushes the man and kills him with one stroke. He then massacres the other Midland soldiers, while carrying Griffith in his other arm. Now in the manga, Wyald is the one that reveals Griffith's desecrated body, as Zod flies down to impale him with his horns. And with that, we're finally back on track again. Casca then stands before the Hawk, as everyone is quite depressed and beaten up. In the manga, Guts is in bandages due to his arduous fight with Wyald, but because that fight didn't happen in the anime, he's just in his armor. Corcus breaks down in front of the Hawk, realizing that their dream of attaining their former glory is long gone. Casca tells Guts that everyone is weak, and that's why they rely on other people's dreams. She then goes to change Griffith's bandages, as Judo implores Guts to go live his own life. Now before Guts ventures off, Gaston and the other Hawks raiders ask if they can go along as well. Guts then comes to the realization that everything he ever wanted was right in front of him this entire time. He just noticed that too late. While Casca takes care of Griffith, Griffith falls on top of her as he trembles. Casca then tells Guts that she can't leave Griffith's side, since he's so frail and helpless right now. And Griffith hears this entire conversation, and it's something that really sets him into a depression. He's then visited by his idealized self. He stares off at the castle that he so sorely wants, as a child version of himself runs by. Griffith takes the reins of the carriage, and starts chasing after the dream that is slipping out of his fingers. The carriage knocks him into the air, as he has a dream in which him and Casca are husband and wife. As Casca holds the spoon in front of his face, he sees the egg of the king floating in the soup. And with this, he awakens in the lake with a broken arm. Distress makes him laugh in a deranged manner, and realizing that there's no hope left, he sees a jagged stick, and so decides to kill himself. Alas, he can't do it. And then, by some twist of fate, causality if you will, Griffith finds the Beylit in the water attached to his own arm. Now in the anime, he has a flashback of the old woman who originally gave him the Beylit. In the manga, he remembers the prophecy foretold to him by Zod and Wyald. As the Band of the Hawk approaches Griffith's location, a solar eclipse is seen in the sky. Guts calls out for Griffith, as Griffith silently tells him to stay away. Guts then grabs onto his shoulder, as the Beylit screams out in pain, initiating the unholy festival. Now at the start of episode 24, the Band of the Hawk finds themselves trapped within the walls of the festival. Before this happens in the manga, Rickert receives some medicine from a convoy of entertainers. In said convoy, a fortune teller says that a giant white star is being concealed by the moon's conjunction. It's an evil omen that will lead to a great calamity. Puck believes that some god or devil is peeking through the hole. And of course, since Puck didn't show up in that first episode, he's nowhere to be seen in the anime. Meanwhile, the unholy moans scare the Band of the Hawk. Casca maintains her composure as she gives out her orders. Guts then notices that Griffith is holding the Beylit. The apostles speak of 4 guardian angels, as Slan emerges from the faces in the ground. Ubik descends from the ceiling as Conrad comes out third. Last, but not least, is the preeminent God-Hand member himself, Void. In the anime, Void welcomes them to the feast, whereas in the manga, he calls it a festival. Void refers to Griffith as the Blessed King, as Guts says that that's a load of crap. Ubik says that because Griffith possesses the necessary qualities, it was destiny for the Beylit to fall into his hands again. Slan then says that the Band of the Hawk will serve as sacrifices for the christening of Griffith as an angel. Now Guts thinks that this is all nonsense, but Void assures him that this was all woven by fate long ago. Now in the anime, he calls this predestination, whereas in the manga, he calls it causality. And of course, it's been called causality ever since, and it just kind of rolls off the tongue better. Griffith is then taken to the altar as Guts holds on to him. Now in the anime, the apostles start chanting sacrifice, while in the manga, they chant invocation of doom. Ubik then displays the reality within Griffith's conscious realm. Turns out that the road towards his desired castle is paved with dead carcasses. A boy that died during the Band of the Hawk's early years wants to be a knight and help out Griffith. In fact, all the fallen soldiers want to come to Griffith's aid, but Griffith reminds him that they're all dead. The old fortune teller reminds him that he piled up these corpses. He did it all for the sake of his dream, and yet the bridge is not complete. He must thusly pile up more and more corpses to reach that desired destination. And if he apologizes now, if he regrets his decisions, it will all be for naught. We as the viewers then discover that Conrad and Ubik are manipulating Griffith. And I've always wondered about this, but after Griffith becomes a member of the God Hand, does he realize that Conrad and Ubik were doing this? He is Griffith after all, he's very smart and calculating, so I would imagine he knows about this, but maybe he's just kind of like, well, it got me what I wanted, so who cares? Now Griffith thinks that this is all a subterfuge on their part, but they remind him that he placed his dream before all of their lives. And even though he needs to sacrifice the remaining members of the Hawk, Slan remarks that they will forgive him, since they've all loved him from the very beginning. Void then says that this is the will of God. Now in the manga, he says that this is the grace of God born of man. Subtle little difference there, but it gives you insights into the idea of evil, an entity that we do not meet within the anime. Void will thusly begin the chant of offering, which is referred to as the invocation of doom in the manga. Now before making the sacrifice, Guts remarks that Guts was the only one who obscured his dream. He was the only one who made him forget. And with this, Griffith submits himself, and the promised time has come. Void thusly brands the Band of the Hawk, and pure despair descends upon them. The invocation of doom brands the various members of the Band of the Hawk. The apostles tear through them as Casca thinks that they don't deserve this. Void says that they are now offerings to demonkind, and that every last drop of their blood belongs to them. Guts attempts to get through the gigantic hand with his dagger, as he wonders if this is what Griffith truly wants. Now, while this event is going on in the manga, we see Rickert outside the Eclipse, which looks like a giant tornado. And by said tornado is the Skull Knight and Zod engaging in combat. Of course, this doesn't show up in the anime. Fear then gets the best of Casca, as she's frozen in place. Judo then comes in with his horse to take her away. Corcus gets chased by some apostles, as one of them digs its claws into his back. The weary soldier lumbers around aimlessly, as he says that this whole series of events is just one big dream. He then sees a gorgeous naked woman in front of him, confirming his delusion that this is just a dream. Unfortunately for Corcus, this is not a dream, as the woman transforms into an H.R. Giger-styled apostle. Even though Judo's arm gets bitten by an apostle, he encourages Casca to fight on. He then uses his body to shield Casca from a tentacle apostle. The two combine their efforts to take the apostle out, as Casca helps him to his feet. Judo then wants to reveal his true feelings to Casca, but unfortunately, all he can muster to say is that she cries a lot, as he then slumps over and draws his last breath. The apostles then surround Casca from every angle, as they tear her clothes from her body. Guts fights on with an apostle horn, as Slan marvels at his vigor. Griffith then sinks deeper and deeper into the darkness, as he notices that his emotions are muted. Balets are then seen ascending upwards, as a mysterious voice says that they are droplets. Droplets coming from an ocean from the other side. Now, this voice is supposed to represent the idea of evil, but they don't clarify that within the anime. And of course, Chapter 83 does not show up in the anime. Guts then struggles to find his comrades amongst all the blood and corpses. But luckily, it seems like Gaston is still alive. This doesn't last for long, however, as his face explodes into a million pieces. Pippin looks to still be alive, until Guts finds out that he's being controlled by the Count. And as it just so happens, all the Hawks' bodies are being mutilated, as Guts cannot handle what he's seeing, especially given the fact that Casca is being displayed completely naked. He attempts to reach her, but Borkov bites onto his left arm, stopping him in his tracks. A thumping heartbeat puts everything on pause, as Griffith is officially reborn as Femto, the fifth member of the God Hand. Griffith flies down to Guts' location, as he stares straight in his face. Casca is then presented before Griffith, as he fondles her body and begins to kiss her. Guts begins cutting his own arm to set himself free, as Griffith rapes Casca. Even though Guts manages to escape, various apostles pin him down onto the ground. While Griffith's sordid display continues, an apostle shoves his claw into Guts' left eye. Blood streams down, as the last thing that he sees with this eye is Griffith having sex with Casca. And that's the moment in which it fades to white. We don't see the moments in which Skull Knight bursts into the Eclipse to save the two. And after the ending credits roll, Guts equips his Dragon Slayer. Goto then tells him not to get himself killed, as the Black Swordsman walks off and prepares for a fight against many more apostles. And it's all in pursuit of killing Griffith. Now, from the perspective of the anime, we don't really get any closure on what happened to Casca. But anyway, that ends the comparison between the Berserk 1997 anime and the manga. As you can see, there were quite a few differences, but at its core, it was still the same story. I had a lot of fun doing this series, and I fully plan on doing the same thing for the 2016 anime as well. Now, as most of us know, the 2016 anime is, dog water by comparison. But I've only watched it once, and that was a number of years ago, 8 years ago actually, so, it's been a while, so why not? Let's do it again and see all the differences that occurred between the 2016 anime and the manga. And if you thought the gaps between the 1997 anime and the manga were large, they're humongous in the 2016 anime. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the flip side.